So I want to hark back as we get started to the ceremony that we saw this morning, that incredibly moving ceremony. Because what we're going to talk about here today is not just how immigration is good for America, but how naturalization and citizenship actually even ups the ante and makes the immigrants even more beneficial for the United States. It's a benefit for themselves, but it's also a benefit for the country. So those very people who we saw this morning, when they came in the door, they were a great asset for America, but as they went out the door, they're even more, and as they're sitting here, they're even going to be more of an asset, and we're going to delve deeper into that. What I want to do in my couple of minutes as a moderator is just frame it a little bit, what we're talking about, what we're not talking about, and kind of how citizenship fits into the process. So we're not talking about the debate in Washington. We're not talking about comprehensive immigration reform. We're not talking about, dare I use the term, illegal immigrants or unauthorized immigrants. What we're here today to talk about are legal immigrants who've come to the country and are on visas and decide to make the transition to be citizens. So, hold on to the word, legal, legal, legal. What part of legal don't you understand and aren't we talking about? What I would like to do just before we get started is talk a little bit about how people do become citizens, right? Because when you go out and you are in focus groups and you talk to people about citizenship, what you hear again and again is, why don't they just go down to the post office and pick up their papers? As if citizenship is just something that happens like that. Well, citizenship is not just something that happens like that. The process, to be very quick about it, is people come on a visa. Sometimes they come on a long-term visa, a permanent visa. Sometimes they come on a short-term visa, like a student visa, and eventually graduate to a permanent visa or green card. Then once you have a green card, you wait in the country for a while. You have to wait at least 5 years on your permanent visa before you can even apply to become a citizen. Many wait 5 years, many wait 10 years, some wait 15 years. Some people remain in the country and never become citizens and just stay here on these legal permanent visas. And a legal permanent visa allows you to live here and work and travel, but not vote, not serve on a jury, not serve in public office, and there's some other, you get different kinds of government benefits. The question is, what we're going to talk about is why do people make that step and what happens when they make that step? But what you have to understand is that in the population, it breaks down about a third, a third, a third. If you just watch TV, you would think all the immigrants in America were unauthorized. In fact, it's about a third, a third, a third. Actually, 37% of the immigrants in the country are citizens. 31% are people with permanent visas who could become citizens but just haven't done it yet. And 28% are unauthorized immigrants. So the picture you see on the news is incredibly misleading. But the question before us today is, what about this third that could become citizens and haven't yet? That's 8 million people. And that's a lot of people, 8 million people, right? I was looking at the numbers. It's a long line. It's 4 times Dallas-Fort Worth, all the people. 8 million people could become citizens tomorrow, but haven't chosen to do it. And so one question is why, and how can we encourage them? Because, as we're going to see, it would be an incredible economic boon for the country. So citizenship, the other just last point I want to make before I turn it over to our really terrific panel is citizenship is part of a long process of integrating or assimilating, right? Integration or assimilation, people use the words interchangeably. That takes a whole lifetime for many immigrants, sometimes two generations. And it has many different kinds of phases. It's everything from coming here and getting a job and finding your first apartment, that's part of assimilating, to eventually learning English and perhaps marrying an American and rising up in your job and serving in the military. Assimilation means so many different things, some of them objective, like getting a job and rising up educationally, and some of them subjective, right? Like coming to believe that you belong here and that you love America and that it's we, not they. And citizenship is kind of the capstone of that process. Citizenship is what people do when they decide, I really belong here and I actually want to join the family formally. So we want to step back from that kind of emotional side of it and talk about what are the economics of this. Making that decision to join, what does that mean for you economically, and what does that mean for the country economically? And I have a terrific panel here. We have a terrific panel to lead us through this. And I'm going to introduce them as I ask them a first question. So let's start with you. Sorry, it's a little echoey when I look down. Richard Vedder, you're an economist by training. You're a professor emeritus at Ohio University and a fellow here at the Bush Institute. Let's talk about the big picture. Before we get to citizenship, can you help us understand how integration or assimilation yields economic benefits? So what happens economically when people go through that long process and become integrated? What happens to their incomes? What happens to their education levels? What happens to home ownership, right? Wealth creation? What happens as people settle and put down roots here?
Excellent question. And I'm thinking of something Jim Glassman said just a minute ago. He says, immigrants get it. But immigrants don't get it overnight. It takes time for immigrants to get it. And immigrants come into the United States, maybe they earn 60 or 70% of what a native-born American typically earns when they come in. 12, 15 years later, there's some argument about the length of assimilation. We won't get into that debate. Most of them have more or less caught up with the native-born Americans in terms of income levels and so forth. It takes a little longer to catch up in terms of wealth because that takes longer to accumulate. And usually, by the time their children come along, the second generation often outdistances native-born Americans in terms of earnings. By the way, this is true historically. We can talk about that later. So it's a process. But it is an assimilation process. But assimilation is something even native-born Americans have. When a kid graduates from college or high school and goes to work, they may make X. 20 years later, they're making 2X. They're making twice as much. They learn on the job. They learn by doing. They accumulate human capital. Immigrants have the same problem, but they have a double problem because they come in. First of all, they have less language skills, and language skills are particularly critical. That is the single most important determinant of increasing income among immigrants. They learn on the job. They learn in the workplace. Best way to learn English is to speak it, and the best way to do it is to work and have to talk it. They learn work discipline. Some people come from countries where getting to work at 8 o'clock may mean 8:20 or 8:30. In the United States, it means 8 o'clock. So we learn work discipline. There's a whole host of things. Lingo, colloquialisms that you don't learn in English classes, or the Germans don't in the German classes they take in German, I'm sure. And so it is an assimilation process, and it takes quite a number of years. A lot of it is learning labor market information, to learning about occupational choices. You come to the country, you're limited. You have friends and relatives who may help you get the first job. You may take the first thing that comes along, but your choices are very limited. So over time, you build up. And one way, of course, you build up is through education. And so immigrants tend to go to school at night and so forth to further their education. That too, the credentialing. I think the credentialing process of naturalization is not entirely different from the credential of getting a college diploma in another slightly different context. A college diploma tells an employer, gee, this person is fairly bright, probably speaks English language well, probably is going to get to work on time, probably is not a drug addict, probably is fairly productive. Therefore, we pay a premium for college graduates. Similarly, I suspect naturalization has a similar impact. A person who is known to, who can say that I am a naturalized citizen is a person who's saying, I'm making a commitment to this country. I want to be a member of the family. And probably in the employers' minds, this means I think this person is a little more committed, a little more disciplined, a little more capable of doing what I want done, and therefore I'm willing to pay a premium. And the next speaker will speak much more to this than me, and I don't want to steal his thunder, but there is a premium, maybe 10% or so. I'll let others speak to that.
But so you painted a picture of immigrants come, it's even harder for them to do this assimilation than it is for Americans, but they do catch up within 10, 20 years.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the bottom line. So was that true? Is that the same as, what was it like in the past? You know, again, you hear a lot of people say, you know, my grandmother spoke English overnight, and you know, now all you hear in the supermarket is Spanish. How are immigrants today assimilating compared to immigrants in the past, and what's the economic payoff today compared to in the past?
That's a wonderful question. I love to talk about this, and I have to be careful. I'm a professor with tenure, so I talk forever. Don't pay attention to rules. It's the same now as it was 200 years ago. It's the same. It's different in some ways. The nationalities changed, the accents have changed, the kind of dress has changed. You know, Benjamin Franklin in the 1760s complained about how Pennsylvania was being Germanized, that the Germans are taking over and they're just not the same as the English. They're not as good as the English, they're not as smart as the English, and so forth. In the 1850s and 1840s, we had the Irish immigration to the United States. The Irish are, first of all, they're alcoholic. Secondly, they're Catholic, et cetera, and all of these things are bad, you know, because the Catholics won't be able to integrate with the Protestants, and the alcoholics won't be able to integrate with the, those who are sober. And I find they integrate quite well on college campuses, by the way.
But the economic benefits.
But
Sorry
the
to be
economic
schoolmaster here.
But the know-nothings, you know, said you need 21 years to be nationalized. We had a party got 21% of the vote in the 1856 election, an anti-immigration policy. So this sentiment is the current generation is not as good as the previous one. Has been true throughout history.
And the economic benefits of assimilation have been through?
And the economic benefits have been true. In 1909, the Immigration Commission said immigrants to the United States make 80% of what native-borns make, which isn't too much different than today, actually a little less. But they also, and that group had an agenda that wasn't all pro-immigrant in 40-some volumes of studies. But basically, bottom line was, by the end of their lives, by the end of their career, and you certainly look at their children, they assimilate like crazy, they're productive, they move ahead. They get it, as Jim Glassman says.
Okay, great setting for where we're going to go next, which is to Manuel Pastor. You're professor of sociology and American studies and ethnicity. You've got a lot of topics at the University of Southern California. You've homed in on a part of this terrific study where you look not just at the economic benefits of assimilation generally, but the economic benefits of naturalization and citizenship. So why don't you walk us through that study? And I'm going to ask you in two parts. Let's first talk about the benefits to the individual immigrant.
So let me start by first saying that I want to push back on one thing you said, which is that some college degrees do signal that you're a drug addict. So you want to be a little careful about that. And then I'd actually thought that it would be very graceful, because I'm from California, I'm in Texas, to start by talking about the state rivalry and making fun of California, but apparently that was done already. And I guess the only thing we're hoping is that now that your governor is retiring, that he won't spend the next 2 years trying to get the University of Southern California, USC, to become USD, the University of South Dallas. So please don't let that happen. So yes, we did a report about a year ago funded by the Knight Foundation called Citizen Gain, which is a really great title for those of us my age. When you tell young people citizen gain, they're like, what does that mean? Is that so? But what we looked at was what were the gains in particular just to naturalization. And the interesting thing was, for those who are nerds here, is that we tried to control for English language ability, recency of migration.
I was going to say, you can't explain this by using the word regression analysis.
Yeah.
You have to explain it without the word regression analysis.
I'm an economist. I feel naked without a regression. But you know, basically we tried to control for everything that should explain the difference between citizens and non-citizen immigrants, and we still found that citizens made about 8 to 11% more than non-citizens simply by virtue of becoming citizens. Now, why the gain? The gain seems to be because when you're a citizen, you've got a wider range of jobs that you can move into. number one. Number two, when you're a citizen, you've made a commitment to the country, and that commitment you've made to the country leads you to make much more US-specific investments in your human capital, your education, and it fits better with the labor market. And then finally, it's really the credentialing effect that you were talking about as well. And the credentialing effect is that employers see the act of citizenship and being a citizen as standing up for a lot of the other kind of markers that you were talking about, worker discipline, English language ability, knowing the civics of the country, et cetera. Now let me say a couple of other things about this, which is why you should actually have faith in these numbers. Steve Moore asked before, well, isn't it the case that it's just a certain type of person who becomes a citizen, so that's what you're capturing? Well, what's interesting is that when you do longitudinal studies looking at the same person over time, there's been very few of those, you find that it's still about an 8 to 11% gain. And what we did was use the American Community Survey, the big census data, and we looked at this in a cross-sectional way, but we also had information on the year that people naturalized, so we could sort of simulate what the gains were over time, and they exactly fit these longitudinal studies. Second thing you should be aware of, which is that this is not a gain from legalization, because we in California have been able to estimate who in that sample is unauthorized, who is authorized but not a citizen, and who's a citizen. And actually, very little of the gain comes from authorization. More of the gain comes from making that final step to citizenship. And that is absolutely crucial, actually, in this current debate, because the act of including a roadmap to citizenship is about making sure that we can actually capture the economic gains that come from this. And these gains, and because I know you're going to ask me a question, and like any professor, I'm filibustering.
Okay, but it's going to end in a minute.
Yeah, you'll end in a minute, is that these gains are not just for these individual workers. We have to realize
well, that's where we're going. That's where we're going. So next question. So we have 8%, 8 to 11% for the individual. Those people who were here this morning, they can go out and ask for an 8 to 11% raise. But take it now, just where you were going, take it for the bigger society. What's the gain for America? Not just for the immigrant getting the bigger gain. What's the gain for the rest of us?
Well, it's a gain for the rest of us in a couple of ways, but one specific gain, even before we get to the big macroeconomic impacts, is we have to realize how many kids are the kids of immigrants, right? So, for example, in the state of California, half of our kids have an immigrant parent, right? So the gains that they make actually translate into that next generation being able to have a few more resources in the house, parents who, through the act, I mean, we can just focus in on the earnings gain, but somebody who's a citizen starts to feel more comfortable about going to the school, engaging with the teachers, really being involved in education, and thinking that they have a role to play in improving their schools, improving their communities, improving their neighborhoods. But the gains don't just stop for immigrants and their families. We estimated that it's about a $21 to $45 billion increase in their earnings and therefore their spending power over about 10 years if we could simply take the 8.5 million folks who are not naturalized and naturalize just half of them. Those are the gains that we would get. And here in the state of Texas, because I know you're very Texas focused, it's about a $1 to $2 billion gain a year if you can move the naturalization rates up. So this is a big macroeconomic gain and essentially money that we're leaving on the floor.
So you take half of the 8.5 million that could naturalize and haven't, you get 21 to 45 billion over what amount of time?
It's over 10 years with most of that coming. Because one of the things that you need to realize is, and by the way, if there's any people who just got naturalized this morning, don't go ask for an 8 to 11% gain tomorrow. You probably won't get it. What the data shows us is that gain does happen over time. It takes
what
about
time?
5 to 6 years to really get the initial boost and probably peaks at about 8 to 10 years. So what we know is that what we do now with this, if we simulate it over time, we'll begin to get these gains. But this is an incredibly important thing that is, we who've been working with immigrants need to be doing more to encourage naturalization. We need to be thinking, I know you're going to ask me about this later, what stands in the way of people naturalizing.
We're coming back to that. We're coming back to that. Ali, we're coming to you.
And I will now be quiet.
You're the executive director of the National Immigration Forum, leading the forum's new Bethlehem project to help immigrants become citizens. So talk to just where where Manuel was going, let's talk about the obstacles. What are some of the obstacles here? Why don't people just go down to the post office and pick up their papers? Why is this a hard process, and what's getting in the way of it?
Sure. Well, first of all, I really want to thank the Institute for putting on the entire day of event and for the invitation to this panel. The naturalization process, and frankly, immigration law, is more complicated than any other set of laws within the federal government. And oftentimes people say it is more complicated than tax law, if you can even imagine that. So for an individual to go from entering the country on a student visa, then to adjust to legal permanent residence, then to eventually become and apply for naturalization is a process that can take anywhere between 7 to 15 years. And that's a big range. And within that range comes a significant cost, significant criteria that the individual has to meet, whether it's English or civics or skills just to adjust their status. So it's not something that you can just go to the post office and pick up your paperwork. And the other thing is that just thinking more specifically about English, for example, there was a survey done in 2002 where nearly 90% of immigrants surveyed said that they want to learn English and that they believe that their economic success depended on their English proficiency. And I think the previous panelist, Apia, had mentioned that when you look at the data, half of that, the poverty gap between Hispanics and non-Hispanic whites is actually attributed to a lack of English proficiency. So that the obstacle here is one of access.
So what about English? Let's focus in on this English piece. What do we know about the benefits of learning English? I mean, Pia, that's a great number, but what else do we know?
Well, I would argue that a lot of the growth that Manuel found in his study, that 8 to 11% growth for an individual's wealth, can also be attributed to English proficiency. And the fact is you have additional skills to present to an employer. And this has been the interesting part about the work that we've been doing is that when you talk to employers, whether they are big employers, small employers, across the skill range, they're looking for individuals with English skills. And frankly, they're starving for ways to improve the English skills of their workforce. So whether it's bringing in a community college, the tuition reimbursement programs, there's an incredible amount of innovative models to facilitate the learning of English.
So let's talk about what you actually do, what the Bethlehem Project does. How are you helping people learn English, and how are you helping people become citizens?
Well, the story here is that in 1915, Bethlehem Steel was the first company in America to provide English classes to their immigrant workforce. Now, we all think 1915, those are the good old days. Yes, they were. But the fact is that one of the leading institutions or corporations in America said, okay, we have an immigrant workforce who needs to learn English, let's help them do that. So we've been going to businesses across the country, and with support from the New Americans campaign, have been asking employers like Marriott, like the Intercontinental Hotel, like American Apparel, been working like partners with like the LA Chamber of Commerce, are you a modern day Bethlehem Steel? Do you want to help your workforce not only learn English, but also become citizens? And we're finding in cities across America that their employers are saying yes, because they love the idea of being able to stand up and tell America that these are immigrant workers who are contributing to their bottom line, learning English, and becoming Americans. So this sort of, again, an innovative model of connecting the employer to their employee in a different way that serves both needs.
Well, and it's not just that they want to sound like the good guy, right? It's also that having employees who speak English is much more profitable.
Yep.
If you speak English, let me keep going down the road, we'll come back. If you speak English, you move up on the job, and then the business retains you, and you're much more productive. It's not just...
When we first started to think about this idea back in, I think, 2004 in Boston, the Boston Redevelopment Authority looked at the growth in the hospitality and healthcare industries in Massachusetts, in the greater Boston region. And they found actually that the growth in occupations was going to come in areas, in jobs that required a higher level of English skills. But you saw the workforce at that point have low-level English skills. So until that balance was reached, where you had a workforce that actually had the English skills that are necessary for the future of the economy, the region was in a huge amount of trouble.
So Eric, Eric Cohen, you're the executive director of the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, and you're leading the new national New Americans campaign that Ellie was just thanking for support, and support from some of the people in the audience, to streamline access to naturalization services per se. So I want to ask you what you do in a minute, but before we get to what you do, you've been working for more than a decade helping people become citizens. Help us get to the reality of this. Let's put a face on this a little bit. We've been talking numbers, we've been talking historical trends. Tell us about some of the people who you've encountered who want to become citizens and then have gone on the basis of their citizens to become successes. Can you tell us a couple of stories?
Sure, and I also want to thank the Institute for inviting me and for having this. I tell people I'm a naturalization evangelist, and I'm like a kid in a candy store today because it's a whole day devoted to this topic. So this is wonderful. I'll have a very fond impression of the Institute and, of course, of Dallas because of this. But I do want to introduce you to two people, actually three, but one's a couple. And I want to introduce you to Abel Sandoval. And I think Abel is quite typical of someone naturalizing. Some of the people who naturalize today might be similar in similar circumstances to Abel. He and his wife actually are in the process of naturalizing. They came to a workshop that the New Americans campaign runs a couple weeks ago, and I was at that workshop and met with him. Just so you know, at that workshop, there were 200 people interested in applying for naturalization. We helped most of them. There were over 100 volunteers. It was really wonderful. Abel's wife is from Mexico. Abel is from Guatemala. His wife works as a file clerk at the Medical Center at University of California at San Francisco. And if you don't already know, that's one of the premier hospitals and medical schools in the world. They have 3 children. One is tiny, 3 years old. The other 2 are in college. One of their children is studying at the University of California at Santa Barbara and plans on being a lawyer. The other child is studying at Pepperdine University and is studying business and advertising. Abel fled Guatemala in 1988 when he was in his late teens near the end of the Civil War there. He came to the United States and became a house painter. He came unauthorized. And since 1998, he's owned his own house painting business. He has 8 employees and does both commercial and residential painting. He has his contractor's license, fully bonded and insured, and has workers' compensation for all his employees. He made sure to tell me that. Does everything by the book. Additionally, he and his wife are homeowners, and have been homeowners for almost 10 years, which in San Francisco, as you might expect, is a pretty big lift. It's quite expensive to buy a home in San Francisco. He told me why he wanted to become a citizen. He said, first of all, I want to vote. But second of all, I want to take the last step of becoming fully integrated and part of the United States because I don't plan on moving back to Guatemala. I want to plant my stakes in the ground here. And when I told him why I was, after I helped him with his application, I told him, wow, you'd be a great person. I'm going to this thing at the Bush Institute. Can I interview you and talk about your story? He said, oh, yeah, sure. And he wanted me to tell people a little message. And he said, quote, the United States is a great country where we have lots of opportunities and you're allowed to express your opinions. It's a free country, and I want to become a United States citizen and live here for the rest of my life for those reasons. So he's a really good example of someone. And I want to quickly, if I could. Okay.
But he hasn't reaped the benefits of becoming a citizen yet.
He has not yet reaped the benefits, but he will.
Do you have a story with somebody reaping the benefits?
Yes. I'm going to do a couple. Cynthia Alvarez and Bernardo Marino, both from Mexico, and are married to each other. They came to the United States at young ages. Cynthia obtained her green card through the amnesty program back in the late 1980s, and Bernardo through family ties. They both naturalized in their 30s, which was about 10 years ago. Both went to college at University of California, San Diego, where they met, and both went to graduate school at Stanford University. They are homeowners in San Francisco, once again a big lift, and they own several investment properties in the San Diego area where they are leasing out their investment properties. They have newborn twins and are thus helping to support the diaper industry in a significant way right now. Bernardo's a lawyer, employer, and small business owner with offices in San Francisco and San Jose, California. Cynthia is a finance expert. She presently works as the Director of Property Management at Charities Housing in San Jose, California. Charities Housing develops, preserves, and manages affordable housing in Santa Clara. and she oversees a staff of over 50 and an annual budget of over $10 million. And since she arrived at Charities Housing, she's helped raise over $100 million for building and preserving low-income housing. So that, to me, was quite impressive. She oversees the management of 1,100 units in 7 cities for low-income and moderate housing for victims of domestic violence, et cetera. She's also on our board of directors and is on our audit committee and finance committee and really helps us stay on the up and up. We're an $8 million organization with 24 employees. They told me they both feel being U.S. citizens helped them provide financial security. They wouldn't have bought a house had they not been U.S. citizens. They wouldn't have purchased investment properties had they not been U.S. citizens. And they didn't want to miss out on these financial opportunities. And they, once again, wanted to put their stakes in the ground permanently in the United States.
Right, that's very important, that sense of if you're going to stay and you know you're going to stay, then you're going to invest in a whole different way, both financially and in yourself. So I want to come back to what you do, but I want to broaden the conversation a little bit first, because we're talking about a very good story, right? But also, in some ways, a troubling story. Like, we're talking about the benefits and the uplift and how it benefits them and how it benefits us. But when you look at the numbers are a little sobering. 8.5 million people who could be doing this who aren't doing it right now. And, you know, and the gain that you're talking about, and when you look overall, about half of the immigrants, non-Mexicans who could have done it, but only about a third of the Mexicans who could have naturalized. So let's talk a little bit more about what can be done to encourage this, right? Like, so, and I know both of your organizations are involved in it, but so why don't we start with you and come this way, and let's everyone talk a little bit about what, you know, this is a great story for the people who do it, but what about the people who are not doing it? How do we get to them, and how do we get them on the train, so to speak?
Well, is it okay if I talk about what the New Americans campaign is doing? Okay, great, wonderful.
Briefly, so we can go down the line.
Okay, great. So there is a very exciting national campaign going on right now called the NAC, or the New Americans Campaign, where our goal is to help as many people naturalize as possible, respecting the fact that it is a legal process. We want to do it effectively as well as efficiently and quickly. And our guiding principles are to create an impact in diverse communities employing collaboration, innovation, and technology. And right now there are 18 different of these collaborations.
So what does that mean exactly? What does that?
Well, by collaboration, what we're doing, like here in Dallas, is a perfect example. And Catholic Charities here, Vanna Slaughter is in the audience. They're the site lead. And what we've done is help them with financing and with funder support, in large part by the Knight Foundation and the Carnegie Corporation, to provide financing, best practices, innovation here in Dallas and Fort Worth to help them help as many people go through the legal process.
Go through the legal process.
Yes.
So there's a lot involved here, right? Learning English, learning civics, all that stuff. You're helping with the piece that's the actual filling out the paperwork and getting to the legal stuff. Okay.
Helping them get over that hurdle. They refer people and they partner with lots of adult schools, English language learning schools, civics learning schools, even banks and lending circles to get the fee, $680 fee. They partner with lots of those organizations as well.
Okay, so let's come down the line. Ali, talk about, you guys are working with business. What in particular are they helping people do? Are they also helping them with the legal piece and the forms? Are they helping them with English classes? Is it a mix?
So I'll use the example in Washington, D.C. We're working with the JW Marriott, the Metro Center Marriott. And actually, our first session was with the housekeeping staff. It was an incredible moment because we met 2 women who had been working at that Marriott for 10, 15 years. And they'd been eligible for naturalization for nearly that amount of time. And the one reason why they had not taken that final step is because they had an hour commute on the train every day, each way. So they lived in suburban Virginia. They said, you know, if I'm working 8 hours a day, it takes me 2 hours to get back and forth home, and I've got things to do when I get home. This is a big thing. So they were so happy to be able to come to work and for the Marriott there to be able to say, okay, we're going to extend your lunch hour so that you can get the assistance that you need to complete the paperwork. So that's one piece, just kind of creating that time and that space. But I think another thing that needs to be done is we actually have to look at the process. what investment can be made by the federal government in terms of facilitating the process so that people are not waiting this long, so that the backlogs are reduced, so that people can actually go from green card status to naturalization in a reasonable amount of time.
And the problem there is that the government, there's a long backlog?
There's backlog. I would argue there's an incredible amount of regulation. I mean, if you think business is overregulated, wait till you look at the naturalization process.
So, Manuel, you've got a great, you focused in a little bit on the fee that other people have mentioned it, but talk a little bit more about that. You have a great number in your report about what happened when the fee went up recently.
Yeah, in 2007, the fee went up to, but essentially it cost somebody about $680 because they both have to pay a fee and do a biometric exam. And that's an understatement of the cost for reasons we can talk about. But in that year, we went from about 1.5 million applications to 500,000 the next year.
Wow.
And when you take a look at it, what happened was it really hit less educated folks who had less money because, for us, $680, many of us on this panel, probably doesn't feel like that much money, but it's about 2.5 weeks of take-home pay for a minimum wage worker. And more than that, if you're going to do this right, you probably want to consult a lawyer, you probably want to make sure you're getting the right number of English classes, et cetera, so the cost of doing this are even bigger than you think.
What are the real costs? I mean, for
my best guess is if somebody's going through this, they should really be putting aside about $3,000 because they probably want to check in with a lawyer as well as make sure that they're paying these fees. So that's really a lot of money.
If you've got a family of if it's $3,000 is one thing for one person. If you've got a family, you've got a bit more.
Well, and for low-income folks, it turns out that it really means that they're facing a liquidity constraint, even though there are economic gains that will come. And one thing I want to clarify is the English language effect is different than the citizenship effect.
Okay.
The English language effect is about a 15% boost in your wages. The citizenship effect is about an 8 to 11% boost in your wages. There's a couple of other things. The unadjusted differences between immigrants and non-immigrants, or citizens and non-citizen immigrants, is pretty large.
So let me just play that out. So 15% is in getting to English proficiency, you get a 15% boost in your wages, and you're not counting that in your 8 to 11% citizenship.
Right. Exactly. So there's really a lot of gains here. And so one of the things is it's really good to be seeing how business is reaching out. It's really good to see the kind of programs that were being talked about before. One that's really interesting because all sectors can be involved. In Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Public Library has created citizenship corners. This is a place where a lot of immigrants and their kids go. They wind up, they're taking their kids to the library. There's a little corner there that tells them how they can become a citizen. They're still going to face the fee problems, et cetera. Another really interesting program is the microloan program that Citicorp and Casa de Maryland in Maryland have put together to help people who are facing these liquidity constraints to borrow the money to pay for these fees. Because when they see the economic benefits, if somebody could give them the money up front and let them pay it out over time, it's a good investment.
So we're not talking about lowering the fees. The fees really go to something, which is a background check. We're talking about how do we help people pay them. Is that
well,
kind of the
that's
consensus?
one thing. But frankly, I would, the Citizenship and Immigration Services is supposed to be self-financing. There's a lot of benefits from this that maybe suggest we should be subsidizing. But even if we weren't, we might want to consider changing the fees, like re-upping for a green card. Perhaps that should be more expensive, and becoming a citizen should be cheaper.
Okay, so just to explain to the audience, your green card is a permanent visa, and it lasts for your whole life, but you still do have to renew it every 10 years.
Or an H-1B visa, those things basically are sold out, right, in the first month and a half. You could raise the fees there, lower the fees for naturalization, and you could encourage something that we all say we think is important, becoming an important part of the American fabric.
Okay, Richard, you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, just listening to this conversation, if you weigh the costs and benefits of naturalization to the potential naturalized citizen, very often the benefits far outweigh the costs. So if you use the 8 to 11% and you think, well, from the time of naturalization, you have 20, 25 more years of work, you may be talking, what, $3,000, $4,000 a year extra income. Well, that's $100,000 discounted back to the present, 70, 80,000. We got to do our economic stuff here.
Yeah, that's another banned word.
Yeah, yeah. And the costs are $3,000, $5,000. Let's make them 10,000. Even if the costs are 10,000, the costs are still relatively small in relation to the benefits. So we should try to find ways to overcome those costs, to lower them. And I strongly agree with him that maybe we ought to auction off H-1B visas.
Okay, well, let's not go there. That's a long conversation.
No, but there are ways to finance. There are ways to finance the 680. 680 times a million is what? $680 million a year. It's trivia in the present.
Okay, so
budget.
because of the gain that we're going to get, your great gain of $21 potentially billion over 10 years, it could be cheaper.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the businesses, because you've all talked about businesses, and I work closely with businesses. I understand how businesses see a real bottom line benefit in English. I'm not sure I get how businesses see a bottom line benefit in citizenship. We're talking about we've talked about the benefit for the individual, we've talked about the benefit for the economy, but if I'm running my flower stand or my chain restaurant or my whatever, what's the benefit to me of having the people that are working for me be citizens?
It's a great question, and we frankly when we were starting the project, had to really kind of talk people through it. And the first question we got back from businesses was, well, what if my workers aren't eligible for citizenship? Are they even here legally? Yes, take a deep breath, you're okay. Because the HR people started to kind of get a little anxious on us. So first question we had to answer was, okay, what's the citizenship process? Once we answered that question, people realized that, okay, through that process, people are learning additional skills, English, civics, et cetera. So that bottom line impact gets back to the tangible skills that are built over the course of naturalization. And it really comes down to every business, at the end of the day, yes, there's a bottom line impact, but they also want to be a part of a good story. They want to tell a good story. And they want to tell a good story to their workforce and to also their customer base.
But there's not an economic, I like that good story, but I'm also looking for the bottom line here, right?
I mean, so there's also no cost to the business.
Right.
That's the thing.
Okay.
Because the model that's been created is that they're able to create time within the workday that's not taking away anything they're losing. So again, that benefit is to be able to engage their workforce in a completely different way. And that workforce then feels much more investment in their employer.
Well, that's an economic benefit. Your workforce feels more invested.
And that is really one of the key things. You're talking employee loyalty. And one of the things that's very interesting is a lot of the firms that hire immigrant workers, I think sometimes when they initially hire them, they think, oh, this might be an easily exploited labor force. And then afterwards they go, my gosh, these are really hardworking folks that we want to be able to keep. So this is one way to be able to retain people, because the loyalty of seeing your company aid you to become part of the American society and the benefits that that has for your kids, that is something that leads to long-term relationships.
And what we're finding in Miami with the hospitality industry is that hotels are almost competing with each other.
Sure,
They're saying, oh, well, I've got this, I brought the Bethlehem Project on, have you, and my workers are real happy. So it's kind of nice to see businesses actually saying, hey, sign me up, because I want to be able to engage my workforce in this way.
Okay, so let's do another hard question, and in a minute we'll go to questions of the audience. So a lot of, the skeptics, you go out and again, you do these focus groups, you go on Talk TV or whatever, and people talk radio, and people say, they want to become citizens because they want the welfare benefits. Even legal immigrants don't get much in the way of welfare, and if they become citizens, they can do all these things. What's the answer for that? What do we say to that question?
It's mostly first of all, it's an exaggeration that immigrants crave welfare benefits. If you look, there are different periods in history, you get different results. It is true that for some immigrant groups in some periods in history, the incidence of welfare usage is a little higher than it is among the native-born.
But not now.
But generally speaking, immigrants are low welfare users. They are indeed, the illegal immigrants are avoiding it like the plague in many cases for legal reasons. The ones that are here legally, though, have an extremely high rate of work participation. This is another thing that they work. They are hard workers. They prefer work to welfare, to go to Steve Moore's trade-off analogy.
But when you become a citizen, you are eligible for other benefits.
Well,
I've never seen an immigrant who says that's why they're naturalizing, but again, there are the skeptics out there. So
no, there are the skeptics, and one of the things that would feed into that skepticism is that when Clinton's welfare reform in the late 1990s passed, there were a lot of folks who shifted over to citizenship from the legal LPR, what's called lawful permanent resident status, in order to be able to access benefits that they were losing under that welfare reform. But I don't think any serious economist believes that welfare is actually a magnet for immigrants, nor when you look at the data, do they use welfare extensively. The second thing, and this is really something you were pointing to, is that the rate of mobility over time. I mean, one of the things we found in California that's striking, immigrants who've been here for longer than 30 years have a higher rate of home ownership than the native born. People really want to sink their roots in, they really want to make investments, and they really want to be independent. And
when you, even to the degree there is welfare use, if you stack it up next to your $21 to $45 billion, it's not going to be very much money.
Eric,
well, I was just going to say, add something to the business conversation we were having just a minute ago. I used to work with someone who owned a small manufacturing plant, actually made wedding dresses, and he employed about 50 people in LA in the garment industry. And he wanted everyone to get legal and that legal status and then to naturalize, because he felt it was a higher retention opportunity for him. He had trained all these people, and he wanted them to stay with him as employees. And he thought it was magnificent that they went through the process.
Great. This is really terrific, very rich conversation. Let's open it up to the others in the room. We'd love to hear your questions. We'd love to hear, as with the last panel, we'd love to hear who you are. If you're here with an affiliation, we'd love to hear your affiliation. And please make it a question if you can. Yes, Damien. Sorry, your microphone has a long way to come. Please wait for a moment.
I thought we weren't getting any more tough questions.
Okay.
Damien Thorman with the Knight Foundation. We have a new app out under the NAC too, which is very exciting. My question is, we've talked a lot about the economic benefits, which is fantastic. Can you talk a little about the benefits to civil society and the fabric of the country in terms of what immigrants offer?
Yeah, so just to put that in a little bit of perspective, and we can, our job was to talk economics, and I was going to do a little bit of a disclaimer, because I think it is really important. People are not widgets, and we don't want to think about immigrants as widgets, and it's painful to be just limiting it to this. I've been sort of chafing all hour, but you don't want to be the kind of person who only thinks about the bottom line, but you also don't want to be the kind of person who doesn't think about the bottom line when you're thinking about immigration. So let's have a word or two about the next panel will be all about the non-economic benefits. But let's say a word.
I would say just in terms of why people become citizens, because they want the full rights and opportunities and protections of citizenship. So when President Bush said today that the most important title that he's ever had is U.S. citizen, that means something to people. And it means something to their neighbors. So, and it's somewhat intangible, but it's also incredibly important when people are dealing with, whether it's state or local or the federal government, is to be able to say, yes, I am a U.S. citizen. And that's who we are as a society. And I believe that is the reason why people become citizens.
Yeah, go ahead.
Despite fee increases, one thing that we also see as a pattern in the data is that when immigrant communities feel like the anti-immigrant rhetoric has gotten heated or the tone is negative, they move toward naturalization. They move toward engagement. So one of the things I think that is a main benefit of naturalization is you learn about U.S. civics, you learn English, which is going to make you more effective working with the teachers at your school. You get more of the confidence that you need to say that I belong here and I should be able to have a voice in the civic life. So we have focused in on just economics because that's what we were talking about, but these are full people looking to really get a full handle on being part of this American experiment.
Yeah, my experience being at naturalization ceremonies for over years and asking people why they're doing it is people do it when they finally feel they belong. They don't actually do it to get to the other side of the fence. They do it when they feel they have gotten to the other side of the fence in a way and really belong here and are part of the family. And then they say, I want to codify it.
And that speaks to the fact that we should be creating opportunities for even those who are not yet citizens to be able to find voice in the public policy process, to encourage them to participate in all sorts of debates.
Oh, that's another whole debate which we might differ on. But Eric, you were going to add to that.
So I was going to add two things. One is I've seen that in action with people that I've helped to go through the naturalization process, where they become more engaged in their kids' education, where they become more engaged in the PTA, in their neighborhood watch programs, et cetera.
Great.
The other thing is just to follow up on Damien's preface to his questions about the app. The New Americans campaign is doing a lot of work around integrating technology and innovation into the process. There's, as Damien said, a new app. There's also something called...
What does that new app do?
Well, the new app, it can help you figure out, if you plug in your zip code, where the closest location is. It can help you go through the naturalization process. It can help you learn the civics questions, do an English test, the requirements, et cetera. And then if you get to not an app, but a real computer, you can actually go through and get screened for naturalization and can complete your application online with pop-ups like a TurboTax type of thing, where it can give you more information. Really wonderful process.
Great. Another question? Come to you in a second. Another question? We don't have another question. Yes, please, Jim. You don't need to identify yourself, but you do need a microphone.
I need a microphone.
Good. While we're waiting for the mic, just to follow up on what was said earlier, the economic benefits of immigration have spillover effects that go beyond what we might call traditional economics. For example, the additional income associated with, say, naturalization raises tax monies that allow us to do many things, and that, at least that should be mentioned.
Very important. Jim.
Yes, so Jim Glassman from the Bush Institute. You talked a little bit about what the process is like. You have to learn English, you have to learn civics. But I didn't hear any comments from anyone on the panel about whether that's a good process or not in an economic sense or in a general integration sense. Would you improve it, and how would you improve it?
Great, great. Someone want to talk about that? I was involved a couple of years ago with redesigning the test. And during the Bush years, we redesigned the Naturalization Service redesigned the test, trying to make it more relevant, still deep. I mean, I challenge anyone in the room to take the naturalization test and pass it. You know, we all think we went through high school civics and history. It's harder than you know, there's a lot we should know we don't know. It is a real test. You really do have to study. The idea of the redesign during the Bush administration was not to make it easier, but to make it more relevant and studyable, and I think it improved it, but others in the room may have.
So two things. One is, right now, this process is much more streamlined than it used to be. If we were in this conversation 15 years ago, and it started with President Clinton, but it really accelerated with President Bush in streamlining the process. Now you can go A to Z, from a green card holder, lawful permanent resident, to a citizenship, to having your citizenship in sometimes as little as 4 months or even 6 months. 15 years ago, we were talking sometimes 2.5 or 3 years. So that's one really positive part of it. I do think the process is elongated. I do think that 5 years is a long time to have to be here to put your roots in. I'd be a bigger fan of 3 years plus. It would help economically if you can become a citizen over 3 years versus 5 years for all.
And just to be clear, so 5 years you wait before you even start.
I'm sorry.
At 5 years you apply, and then the processing itself can get done, as you said, in about 6 months.
Right.
But people do. The process involves, you know, this legal hurdle that we've been talking about in the fee, but it also involves, you know, people, in New York, you go on the subway and you see people studying for the test in their books. You know, it's like studying for the SAT or what have you. People are learning English and history.
I would agree that it's, you know, the process, the naturalization process itself has gotten better over the past few years. And that's the short window of time, the shortest window of time. What I'm actually more worried about is everything that has to take place before you actually get to green card status. And that's, you know, you're entering the country on a family visa, on any one of a gazillion different work visas. To be able to, number one, be able to access that legal point of entry is incredibly difficult and competitive. In some ways that's good, in some ways it's not. But then actually be able to adjust status from that work or family visa to be able to be eligible for legal permanent residence is a difficult process. And you have to, you know, figure out who's going to sponsor you, how are you going to be sponsored. And that, I believe, can be streamlined in a way that actually meets our interests as a country, because you shrink and streamline that window and you get to the shorter window, the final economic benefit to the country is much greater.
So
The requirement that we speak English to become a citizen is a great thing, and it means we should be flooding the zone with English as a second language classes that are also more oriented around the fact that immigrants are so highly involved in the workforce that they need much more community-based and evening classes. When you look at adult ed classes teaching people English, you're generally seeing 2 times the number of people wanting to get in the class. People really want to learn English. We should be trying to make that more available. It's a good investment in the economy, in citizenship, in civic engagement.
yeah, I mean, that was the great study, and I thought someone was going to cite it earlier. A couple of years ago, someone did a study of how long people are waiting.
Yeah.
And I'm going to forget exactly the numbers, but I think it was in cities with high immigrant concentrations, it's between 4 months and 2 years people wait for an English class. So, you know, you have the people on TV saying why, or the people in the focus group saying, why don't they learn English? But in fact, the ones who want to learn English can't find a class. Pia, I think you had a question.
Can I say one quick thing? Also, the million-dollar question to us in the New Americans Campaign and other people who are doing this work on the front lines is, why is it there are 8.5 million people who are eligible to apply, and between 750,000 and 850,000 are applying annually right now, with the exception of 2007 and a few other exceptions. And those other 7.5 million, how can we get them to that state?
Yeah.
And part of it is because it is too hard to apply. Or there's a fear of applying. It's too expensive. All those things are factors that are really working against our economy.
Has
We want these people to
done research on exactly which factors are really the biggest deterrents? Has anyone studied that yet?
Yeah, well, the number one is English language and the fear of English, because you don't have to be a college professor to pass the exam. But the fear of how much English you need to know, it's really a working English, and most people, a lot of people can do it, and they don't think they can get there. That's number one. Number two is a $680 fee, okay? And then number three is there is, some people just aren't ready to take that step yet. But it's really English, and as Manuel said, if we flooded the system with English classes, that would be a huge impediment that people could get over, and the other is a $680 fee.
Pia, you had a question?
People, by the way, also self-rate their own English abilities lower than other people rate them. So a lot of people, it is a question of fear of confidence.
I know for the elderly in particular, elderly immigrants, this English requirement is a huge barrier. They don't feel like they can learn English at their age. I just wanted to make, I guess, 2 brief points.
And get to a question.
A question? Oh, right, I have to ask a question. Okay, well, I'm going to rephrase.
I have to hold you to the same standards we're holding everyone else.
Can I do a correction, Jim? Okay, so I'll have one question and one correction. So when we look at welfare use, I mean, we typically look at the household, and foreign-born headed households actually have much higher welfare usage. And the reason for that is that, you know, they tend to be poor, and they tend to lack health insurance. So their children get like state health insurance benefits. But the other point I wanted to, well, let me ask you, I've also, from talking to people, heard that people naturalize in order to use the family reunification benefits that they get, so they can sponsor a family for immigration. Can you comment on that?
You want to comment?
That's certainly a big reason why people take the step to becoming naturalized. I've been doing this work for 25 years, and I found that back in the late 80s and through the early 90s, that was the major reason. Because as a U.S. citizen, you can petition for your relatives more quickly than if you're a lawful permanent resident. But since Proposition 187 in my home state of California and some of this anti-immigrant sentiment we've talked about, more and more people since the mid-90s have been accelerating naturalization to vote.
Okay, so I'm a journalist, and we're going to have the last question is going to be a lightning round. You get 1 or 2 sentences each, max 1 or 2 sentences. I want you to back up away from the benefits from the immigrants and think about the benefits to the U.S. What's your sum up bottom line? Why is naturalization a benefit for the country as a whole? Let's start with you.
Me
and
first?
Let's go down the line.
Okay, I think it's a benefit for the country as a whole because it promotes democracy. Promotes our way of democracy. It includes more people allowed to participate, and that's what we want.
Okay.
I think of a small town in Texas or the Midwest, and those small towns not only need more immigrants, but they need more citizens, and that's the vitality of who we are.
Let's go to you, Richard, and then we'll do Manuel.
higher incomes, greater welfare for people other than the immigrants themselves. Everyone is better off. And naturalization adds to that process. It has positive spillover effects on the general American population.
Great.
I was at that movie naturalization ceremony this morning, like so many of you, and what I realized watching it was that it made us aware that this is a unique country in which you can become American by understanding what the principles of the country are. And that says so much about who we are, that encouraging naturalization as an act goes far beyond all the economic and other kinds of reasons we laid out.
Great. Thank you so much. Terrific panel. Thank you very much.
Stay there. Don't leave. Don't leave. Because we're going to take a break. I just wanted to say that when I first heard this panel proposed, I thought, well, that's kind of a strange subject. I really didn't think, frankly, that there was any difference between somebody who came here and got a green card and worked in America and helped the economy and somebody who got naturalized, other than, you know, the kind of the citizenship, the importance of promoting democracy and so forth. But really, this is a very, very important issue. And when you realize how much it helps the economy, it raises important policy questions about, you know, whether we really should burden prospective naturalized citizens with a $3,000 fee, maybe, or help them learn English. It brings to the surface a lot of issues that that I don't think people are thinking about. And in the current debate, there certainly is some dissension over the question of, is it a path to citizenship that we want to change for unauthorized immigrants, or is it a path to legalization and being able to work in America? And this panel, I think, is quite convincing on that point, that it helps America if people get naturalized and become citizens. So